Deep in the mountains of Cross River State, Nigeria, there is a tradition older than anyone can remember. Here, a girl can be married before she is even born, not in myth, not in legend, but in real life today. They call her the money woman, a debt, a loan, a handful of naira, a goat, a bag of grain, and somewhere a pregnant mother, unaware that a child growing inside her has already been promised to a man she may never have met. This is not folklore we tell around a fire. This is a living tradition, and until very recently, it was still happening. Welcome back to Acres of Africa, folk tales and culture. Today, we travel to the hills of Abaniku to understand a custom that has shaped and shattered the lives of thousands of girls, and to ask the question so many outsiders ask when they first hear of it: how does a society decide that a child not yet born already belongs to someone else? To understand this tradition, you first have to understand the land it grew from. Obaliku, a local government area popped into the far north of Cross River State, is one of the most remote parts of southern Nigeria. Its terrain is mountainous, thickly forested, and for generations cut off from the modernizing world moving through Nigeria's cities. It shares its highlands with the Obudu Cattle Ranch, once a famous tourist attraction, but a few hours' drive from the ranch's manicured slopes. In the opposite direction from the postcards lies Becheve land. Becheve is not one village but 17: Ketul, Ekwet, Belejete, Kajinga, Eko, Mangbe, and more, together home to over 150,000 people, bound not just by geography, but by a shared, deeply rooted custom, a custom the outside world would come to know by a simple, almost gentle-sounding name: Money Woman, or, in the local tongue, Okay, Ingolese. Here is how it functions, at its simplest. A man in the community needs money, food, or some form of support. Perhaps his crops have failed. Perhaps he owes a debt he cannot repay. He turns to another man, wealthier, more established, for help. That help comes with a condition. If the borrower has, or will have, a daughter, she becomes the repayment. Sometimes the girl already exists, still an infant at her mother's breast. Sometimes she has not yet been born at all. A man might lend money to a friend on the understanding that if his pregnant relative delivers a girl, that girl will belong to him one day as a wife. The age of the man makes no difference. A creditor of 60, 70, even older, could be promised a girl not yet in the world. When the girl is finally born, and as she grows, the entire village knows what awaits her. She is not asked. She is not consulted. She simply grows up understanding, long before she has the language to question it, that her future has already been decided by a transaction she had no part in. And there is no room for renegotiation. In Becheve custom, a debt settled this way is a debt of honor. To go back on it would shame not just a man, but his whole family line. It would be easy to imagine this as some forgotten relic, clung to only by the poorest, most isolated families. But the truth runs deeper. In much of Becheve society, having a money woman was not seen as shameful. It was seen as a marker of status. A man without one, elders have said, was not regarded as a complete man. He could not speak with full authority in community assemblies. And when he died, his burial would not carry the honors given to men who held a money woman as wife. This is what made the custom so difficult to dislodge. It was not simply poverty forcing hands. It was identity, hierarchy, and respect, all interwoven with the practice. A money woman, in most cases, arrived as the second wife, often once a man already had children by his first chosen partner. She was, in the eyes of many households, less a spouse and more a possession. Valued for the children she could bear and for the status her presence conferred on her husband, and if she died before bearing a child, custom required her family to provide a replacement daughter to settle the same debt all over again. For the girls themselves, the arrangement meant a childhood interrupted and often erased entirely. Education was rarely part of the bargain. A husband's family had little incentive to send a girl to school, when her role, in their eyes, was to bear children and maintain the household. Many girls were taken from their families as young as 5, 6, 9 years old married, in every practical sense, to men decades their senior. Some accounts describe men in their 90s taking child brides only a fraction of their age. One woman, given the name Ochi to protect her identity, was pledged before birth to settle a debt her parents could not repay. At 9 years old, she was taken from her home in Becheve village. Her husband was, by her own account, around 95 years old when he eventually passed away, nearly 15 years after the marriage began. Even after his death, freedom did not come easily. His family refused to fund further education for her or support for her to build an independent life. She had finished secondary school years earlier and still found herself blocked from the next step, trapped inside a system that outlived the man who had claimed her. Her story was not unique. It was, for generations, the ordinary shape of a girl's life in Becheve. Not every girl accepted the fate written for her before birth. A girl known publicly as Loveline had watched the custom cripple the futures of friends around her. Vivian, Charity, Jennifer, Jacinta, names she carried with her of girls whose dreams were quietly closed off by tradition. When it came time for her to be taken to her promised husband, Loveline made a different choice. With the help of a local pastor, she arranged her own escape, fleeing the community entirely and eventually finding refuge in southwestern Nigeria, where she was finally able to enroll in school. Another girl, Rachel Ayen, had been betrothed at just 5 years old. At 14, she made her escape at 10 o'clock at night, walking 4 hours alone through dense, mountainous forest, risking wild animals and the dark, rather than remain in a marriage she never agreed to. These were not isolated acts of rebellion. They were signs of a custom beginning, slowly, to crack under its own weight. Nigeria's Child Rights Act was adopted by Cross River State back in 2009. But for over a decade, the money woman tradition continued largely unaffected on the ground. Missionaries operating in the region became, for many escaped girls, the first safe harbor, offering shelter to those who fled and raising early awareness of just how widespread the practice remained. Journalists began traveling into Becheve land to document the custom directly, publishing the accounts of women like Ochu, Loveline, and Rachel, slowly turning a private mountain tradition into a matter of national conversation. Real change, though, required more than awareness. It required negotiation with the very structure the custom was built on. That work fell to organizations like the African Center for Leadership, Strategy, and Development, who engaged directly with the traditional rulers of Obanliko, the men whose authority had upheld the custom for generations. At a national summit held in Abuja, a breakthrough was finally announced. Traditional rulers of Becheve formally agreed to abolish the money woman tradition entirely. The paramount ruler of Obaniko local government area confirmed the agreement. Bride prices paid under existing arrangements would be returned to the husbands, set at 100,000 naira, regardless of what goods or money had originally changed hands. A mechanism designed to release the women bound by these marriages without leaving the men who upheld the tradition without recourse. Funds were raised, over 6 million naira, to support the liberation of the first 57 women identified as living under the custom. It is, by every measure, a landmark moment. But those who have studied harmful traditional practices elsewhere in the world know the caution such moments deserve. Customs built over centuries rarely disappear with a single agreement. They linger in memory, in scattered households, in the habits of communities, still adjusting to a new way of measuring a man's worth. For the women already inside these marriages, when the news came, freedom is not automatic. It is a process, still unfolding, village by village. We often come to stories like this one searching for the line between culture and harm, between tradition worth preserving and tradition that must be allowed to end. The money woman custom asks us to sit with an uncomfortable truth that a practice can be centuries old, deeply woven into a community's sense of honor and identity, and still cause profound harm to those who never had the power to consent to it. Becheve's story is not finished. It is a tradition in transition, caught between an old world where a girl's future could be decided before her birth, and a new one still being built, testimony by testimony, escape by escape, agreement by agreement. If this story moved you, stay with us, because across this continent there are more traditions like this one. Some still practiced in silence, some already fading into memory, and some like this one standing right at the edge of change. Until next time, this has been Acres of Africa Folktales and Culture. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, share, and turn on the notifications bell. Bye for now. See you in our next story.